Have you ever tried to create a line chart only to find that ggplot creates an empty plot and gives you some weird warning message about the group aesthetic being wrong? Today I'm going to explain what the group aesthetic does and how to avoid this mess. In case you don't know me, my name is Albert Rapp, I am a mathematician and data scientist, and on this channel I help our users with typical data science tasks like creating a line chart and figuring out what ggplot wants. Let's see what we can find out. In my Goto file I've already included two code chunks, where the first one generates some fake data that we're going to use as example data, and in my second code chunk I have loaded tidyverse and I have included the first code chunk that we want to use. And if we execute this code chunk, then we see that it's a nice simple table with columns age and mean value. And what we could do now is to try and create a nice line chart from this. To make that happen, all we have to do is to pass our data to ggplot and specify the aesthetics, where on the x-axis we use age and on the y aesthetic we use the mean value column, and then we'll just simply add a gm line on top of that. And if we execute this, we see that we do get a line chart. Since the fonts in this chart are kind of small and I do want to make the chart overall a bit larger, let me just throw in a theme in here. You don't have to worry about this too much. The only thing that this changes is that the default theme is set to theme minimal with some larger base size, a nicer font family and less grid lines. And if you execute all of this, then you see that this code here now by default uses a different theme where the fonts are a bit larger and you have a white background. We could even make this a little bit larger if we wanted to. Let's just make it really large and let's just go with base size 24. Now in this scenario everything worked kind of nicely, because in this scenario we do have a data set where the thing that we map to the x aesthetic, namely the age column, is a numeric variable. But watch out what happens if on the x-axis we have something that isn't numeric. Let's just throw in a new code chunk here, and then I will throw in one of the data sets that I have generated up here. I will show you that code later on and you can find all of that on my blog post. But for now, let us just look at the data directly. It's just some randomly generated data. Here we have the same column mean value, but now we do have, instead of a numeric column age, we have a character column called age group. And now if we try to use the same code, and then instead of age here, we take the age group name, throw that in as the x aesthetic, and then try to execute the code, we do get a blank plot and we do get a warning message that says gmline has a problem, namely each group consists out of only one observation. And ggplot is even so nice and already tells you that you will probably have to refer to the group aesthetic to fix that. To understand what's going on, let us, instead of gmline, let us throw in a gm point. There you see that we do have the points on our chart. So really what gmline seems to have a problem with is to connect these dots. And in this kind of scenario, really all we want is to connect all of these dots. So if we were to use gmline and execute the code as is, we're back where we started. We have a blank plot, but now we can follow ggplot's advice and map something to the group aesthetic. And since I've already said we want to create one line where all the points are connected, we tell gmline that all of these points belong together. They are part of the same group, and we can do that by mapping the group aesthetic to just any string. We could put in whatever we want in here, or we could just leave it blank. The point is we map everything, all the observations, to the same group. And if we do that, we now see that we do get the line that we want. I do want to point out that in this kind of scenario, it probably makes more sense to create a bar chart instead of a line chart, because we have discrete things on the x-axis here. But it helps to use this as a starting example because it's very simple and you can encounter the same problem in different situations where you really need to know about this grouping thing. So we might just as well start with this very simple but possibly misguided example first. In any case, we see now that we have a line chart, which is nice, but the order is not really in the order that we want. With the numeric data, the one we had before with the age column, everything just worked out nicely because there is a natural order of things and all of the things are just ordered in ascending order from 0 to 100. But with the character column, there is not really an order. And this is also why ggplot has a bit of trouble plotting these things when we don't specify how to connect the line, because that kind of assumes an order that you need. And even if you specify the grouping and execute all of this, you might still run into the trouble that the order that ggplot shows, which is just alphabetical order, doesn't really fit into what you want to do. In these kinds of scenarios, all you have to do is to make this character column into a factor column, because these come equipped with some order. And what you have to do for that is to pass your data to mutate and then modify the age group, where you use the factor function to modify the currently existing age groups, and then put in the levels that you want into the order that you want. So first you want to have less than 18, then 18 to 30, and so on, all the way to larger than 70. And now if you execute this, you do get a plot where the things on the x-axis are in the order that you want. Alright, so let's dive into this grouping thing a little bit more to see what other problems we can run into when we want to use this group thing. So let's create a new code chunk and let's take this code from before. But now I do want to use a different data set. Right now our data has only the columns age group and mean value. And now I want to use a data set that has a little bit more. Namely, I want to use one data set that has another column called line, and these lines are just labeled A, B, C, D, and E. Now watch what happens if I were to execute the code as we had before, but with the different data set. Now we do have some kind of jagged lines here. You see here at the grid lines that these things kind of fluctuate back and forth. In the previous code chunk, if you re-execute this, you see that we do have a sort of smooth line, at least things don't jump up and down. But here in this case, at these points, the lines kind of jump. And the reason for that is basically because we have assigned everything to the same group. But now we do have data for multiple groups. We want to have one line per letter that we have in our column. You could think of this as different categories if you, I don't know, do something with the penguins dataset from the Parma Penguins package and want to do one line per species or something. The point is you want to group by lines now. And this is why you'd have to set the line column as a grouping aesthetic, and now you do get separate lines. And the reason why the thing before didn't work, let's just go back one step. The reason why it looks like it does is because ggplot kind of tries to connect everything with one line now. It first starts with the lower than 18 observations and then draws all of them, which all lie on the same vertical line. Vertical, is that horizontal? No, it's vertical. In any case, on this lesser than 18 line, it first tries to draw all of these lines, then it goes to the next point, and then it tries to draw all of the points or connect all of the points that correspond to the 18 to 30 category, and then it goes to the next. And this happens because we have instructed gmline to use all the points in the same group. But clearly we don't want to do that in this case, so we map the group aesthetic to the line column. And now, if we execute this, we do see that we get very similar lines, but we don't have this jagged, weird thing going on. I'm pointing this out because this jaggedness at a particular point is a telltale sign that you have to modify something with the groups. Now, what if we wanted to make all of these lines into a separate color? Let's just copy this code chunk here and throw this into a new code chunk. And now it's easy to think that we just have to throw all of these things into the color aesthetic, and then we'll get 5 different lines all colored separately. But if we execute this, we once again see that we get a blank chart, but we still get a nice legend with all the 5 colors that we want. Once again, we have the problem with an x-axis that isn't numeric, that we have to specify grouping so that ggplot knows what data points belong together and need to be connected via a line. If we don't specify anything, then gmline will just think each observation is its own little group, and then it cannot draw a line, because for a line, by definition, you kind of need 2 points. So that is why if you want to have different colors and multiple lines, you will not only have to map the color aesthetic, but you will also need to specify the group aesthetic. So if we put all of this together, then we see that we do get 5 lines, and all of them are colored differently. Alright, I think we're getting the hang of why this grouping thing is necessary and how to use it. But let's take this one step further. Let's try to throw in a dataset which has even one more column that will be used as a grouping kind of variable. For that, we'll once again create a new code chunk And then we'll use another data set that I have conveniently named the same, but added something on top. And here I have appended the end fruit thing. And as you might guess, there is a new column that has fruits in them. Now we can play the same game as before. We can just take our code here, the one that we had previously, and then try to execute the code as is and see what happens. Now we do get 5 lines again, but once again we see some weird jaggedness going on the grid lines. Once again we see that every line that we have moves vertically up and down at the grid lines. And we could try to fix that thinking that, okay, we have the line aesthetic for color now, and we have for group aesthetic, we could use the fruit then, right? Well, the same thing is kind of happening once again, because just like in the previous example, if we don't tell gmline exactly what points belong together into one group, nothing is really working as we expect. And once again, all of this is happening because what we have on the x-axis is not a numeric thing. So in these kind of scenarios, you really have to specify what are the groups, what are the points that belong together. Well, we're kind of in a tough spot now. We have to figure out how to stick 2 different columns into this one grouping thing. We have seen that we need to specify line and fruit and kind of the combinations of that and stick that into the groups. Well, luckily for us, there is this interaction function where you can just stick in things and combine things that way. So if we were to specify that for the grouping, there seems to be an interaction of fruit and line. If we do that, then we see now that everything works better now. Now what we do see here should be 5 different colors according to our legend, but now we do have the same colored line for each fruit. So I believe there are 3 different fruits in this data set. Let's just check. Let's just pass this to the count function and count what is in the fruit column, and there we see there are 3 different fruits, so therefore we have 5 different colors, and each colored line appears 3 times, once for each fruit. By the way, notice how the count function is super useful for these kind of checks and figuring out what is in a data set and what not. That's why I started with that function in my last video, where I show you the data cleaning fundamental functions that I use in every data project that I have. If you haven't seen that video, make sure to check that out next. There should be a notification popping up somewhere in this screen right now. If not, then I have probably forgot to add that. This stuff happens. I do have other things to do, you know. But if that happens, feel free to just go into my channel and look for the video before this one. In any case, this interaction function now seems to do what we want. But it can be kind of mysterious if you don't really know what interaction does. So one way to figure this out is to just compute the data. Let's just create another interaction column. Let's just call this column interaction, and in there we just throw in the code that we have here. And now if we only execute this part here, we can see that we have a new column interaction, and in there we see what this function does. Well, it just sticks together the thing that we have in fruit with the thing that we have in the line column. Not really elaborate magic happening here, it's just sticking things together. There should be a meme about this here, about the pen, pineapple, apple, pen guy. He's also just sticking things together. Nothing too fancy going on, but this helps for making sure that gmline knows which points belong together, which points do form a line. And just to drive home the point about this grouping thing, let me just mention 2 more things here. Namely, what happens if we just calculate the data as is, and then we use, as the color aesthetic, we use the interaction here. Clearly, for interaction, we have everything put together now, right? Well, if you've been paying attention carefully, then you will know that this will go wrong. Let's see what happens. God damn it, we have another warning about all groups consisting out of only one observation. Once again, if the X aesthetic consists out of discrete things, basically things that are not numeric, then gmline will not know which points belong together. So that is why in these scenarios you will always need group. And what you can do is to, for example, use the same thing here. And in this case, you will get a differently colored line according to the legend that was printed here already. So because we have mapped the color aesthetic to these combinations, we do see that we get a new color for each different combination, whereas in the previous example, we still mapped to this one column that had only the things A, B, C, D, and E in it, and this is why we only have 5 colors in there. Anyway, if we execute this now, we do in fact see that we get different lines. It's kind of hard to tell that all of them are colored differently, but believe me, it's true. Just believe me, bro, it's definitely true. All of them are colored differently. Really, it's a true story. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. Now let me finish off this video with the reason why this is happening. Why in the world would we need this thing? And I kind of want to motivate this with one of our first examples, namely the one here where we only had the data set with the age group and the mean value. Let's take this data set. In fact, let's just take this whole thing here. And then if we look at this chart, this was our majestic chart here. And now what we could do is to additionally map the color aesthetic and in there check whether the age group is one of the values that is less than 18, 60 to 70 or larger than 70. And if we execute this, then we see that we do get a chart now that has a huge legend. So let's make the label a little bit nicer. And then we see that we have colored the thing where the age group corresponds to under 18 or over 60. And now that I see it, this code is terrible because there are way too little breaks here. So let me just make this a little bit nicer. Let me just style this thing here. And now everything looks a little bit nicer in the code. And now that this is finished, this was driving me insane. Now we have the time to focus on the line chart here. And the reason why grouping works separate from color is because of this exact reason. You see here that we have things that are colored differently, but they kind of belong to the same line. If you think of all the colored things as one line, which is true because of the grouping thing here, but this one line is colored differently at places that are not joined at all. So if the color aesthetic would also determine which points get connected, then it would be kind of impossible to make a chart like this, because then you will probably see another line that goes from this top point of this tealish line to the other top point of the other tealish line to connect all of these things. But here we wanted to have one line, but parts of these lines are just colored differently. So this is why it's actually kind of neat that you do have this extra grouping aesthetic and you don't have to rely on the color aesthetic or some other aesthetic to determine the grouping of which points get connected. So, okay, so this was just a short motivation of why this is actually useful. It's not like we can change any of this, but it helps to know the advantages of why it is happening like that. In any case, that's the end of our video. If you enjoyed this video, then I'm definitely sure that you're going to enjoy either my data visualization course or my data cleaning masterclass. Both of them can be found via the link in the description, or there should also be a link popping up right about now. And with that, we have finished our video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.